everyone, blessed be, and I wanted to show you today how to turn a normal plain boring notebook into a book of shadows. So I took this is actually a sketchbook because I prefer plain paper, and first things first is to cut out some strips of cereal box card and stick them onto the cover like so. This is to form the planks of wood. And don't worry about cutting them all out perfectly straight or anything. Basically, wiggly is good. The wigglier the better. It adds to the texture of the wood later on. So I cut out the strips of card and make sure you've got enough to cover the entire cover of the book. And obviously you're going to want to repeat this on the back and the spine as well if you're covering the whole thing. Here I'm just showing you doing it on the front cover. And just make sure the strips cover the front of the book, but don't have to be perfect, and you can have gaps in between the strips, it's fine, because this will look like planks later on. And then take some hot glue and stick them down. Make sure you've got hot glue along the full length of the strips of card to make sure they're stuck nice and securely. Like so. And when you've got them all stuck down, then what you need to do is just trim off any excess cardboard that's sticking over the edges and just make sure everything is stuck down really well. And then once the cardboard has been stuck down well, then what you need to do is draw the triple moon symbol on the front cover. Do it roughly about 3/4 of the way up, roughly, and then cut that out with the craft knife before you do the next section. I found this bit a bit fiddly, but it's one of them where you have to press firmly enough to get through the cardboard, and it doesn't matter, by the way, if you accidentally cut into the cover of the notebook, because it will all get covered up later on. So it's just a case of cutting out these 2 crescent moon and full moon shapes. And as you can see, because the cardboard's got a few layers to it, sometimes when I peeled it up, just one layer come out. I find it was more awkward to get the bottom layer off because that's the bit that's got the hot glue attached to it. So it might have been an idea to cut these out first, but never mind. And the reason we're cutting these out is because I want to make it look like it's carved into the wood. And obviously by cutting out this layer of cardboard, it's going to add depth to them later on. And I do add another layer of cardboard to this on top just to make it deeper still. I want it to look like it's really etched well into the wood. Any little bits that come up like that, just stick them back down. It'll be fine. It's all going to get covered anyway. This is just like your base layer. It's all going to get covered in the tissue paper and PVA glue mix later on anyway. And just carefully cut them out and remove any little traces of glue, any little tiny traces of paper, you know, from the cardboard. Just make sure you get all those little bits up. I found it easier to do the full moon than I did the little crescent moons. And don't worry about the edges being absolutely perfect. Just get as near as you can. And then what you need to do is cut some more strips to go over the top of these. Now, obviously the strips where the moon shapes are, you'll have to trim them so they go round the moon shapes. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just need this extra layer just to add a bit more depth to it. So all I did was cut out strips of card and stuck them down over the top of the other strips, and where needed, where there was a piece of the triple moon symbol, all I did was cut the card around to fit around it. Now in hindsight I could have done with doing the little crescent moons a bit fatter, but never mind. It still worked out in the end. So as you can see, I'm taking strips. I'm just marking with my fingernail where I need to cut the card and then gluing it down. As you can see, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just to add a bit of depth. And then once you've done that, you need to add 3 layers of PVA glue and tissue paper. And literally you add 1 ply at a time. So if you've got 2-ply tissue, you separate the 2 layers and apply 1 at a time. Put glue on all over the card. Put tissue on, another layer of glue, tissue, and keep going until you've done 3 layers of each. And then once that's dry, you paint the whole thing black as a base coat. And then it's a case of dry brushing different shades of brown over the top. You start off with a darker shade of brown first, but obviously it's got to be light enough so it shows up on the black. Then add a slightly lighter shade and then do a lighter shade still, and then you can add a little bit of like white mixed with grey on top just to finish it off, and a little bit of like a little dab of green dry brushed on here and there to make it look a bit mossy. You can do that as well. So here I'm just dry brushing on the different shades of brown, and each layer I'm getting lighter. It's ideal as well if you can dry between the layers of dry brushing. It just makes it work a little bit better because the colours aren't mixing together as much. It keeps them more separate so they stand out more. So what I did is occasionally I would just use my heat gun just to dry everything off. Obviously here by now I've pretty much done that, so I'm just showing you me finishing off the dry brushing with the brown. And I also took some of the black and watered it down a bit and did like a bit of a black wash around all the edges, so it was like a sort of border, because I wanted it to look brighter in the middle of the book and a bit darker around the edges, as if like the edges of the book have got damp and, you know, it's an old piece of door or something. And this is me adding the final layer of dry brushing, which is a bit of the brown colour mixed with a bit of white and a little touch of black just to make it grey, and then I'm just going over the top. This is just to make the very brightest highlights stand out. As you can see, I'm adding a little bit more white as I do it as well to make those areas stand out a little bit more. And it just really makes the texture stand out that you've added with the tissue paper and glue, because that's the whole purpose of doing it, the tissue paper and glue. It adds that lovely texture of the wood. And then make sure inside the triple moon symbol you paint it black. It just makes it look darker, makes it look like it's carved into the wood. And you can leave it like that. You could have it like that if you wanted to. But I decided to add a little bit more to my front cover. So I'm just going over the grooves in between the planks of wood. And then once that was all dried off, I took my glue stick. It's just me making sure it was all dry in there. And then took a glue stick and applied some glue inside the triple moon symbol. And I did find it was a bit awkward because obviously the size of the cutouts. And then I take some embossing powder. This is silver embossing powder. Don't know what that was in it. I think that was like some metallic flake off something else. And then what you do is you sprinkle the embossing powder over the glue, and that's to hold the embossing powder in place. That's why we put the glue on. Because you have to stick embossing powder down, because once you put the heat gun on to activate it, if you don't, it blows away. And then I took some of the glue stick on my finger and used it to apply it into the little crescent moons. This is why I wish I'd done them a bit fatter, because this bit was really awkward. but it worked in the end. And what you could do, if you're leaving the triple moon symbol black, is just use a little bit of a lighter colour just to dry brush the very edges around the moons to make it look like it's really deep. I decided to do this instead. I realise you lose some of the depth from it, but I kind of like the idea of this sort of silver moon sort of stamped into the wood, as it were. And then all you do is use a heat gun to activate the embossing powder, and what it does is it melts it and it all turns like a really bright silver colour. It's a really nice effect. I do like this embossing powder stuff. I haven't used it for a while. It's some stuff I've used when I've made cards and things in the past. And you see it goes a lovely bright silver colour. It's really nice. And it's just a case of using the heat gun at different angles just to make all of the powder activate and melt. And then the next thing to do is to touch up the edges, because obviously, because it's embossing powder, it's never perfect. There's always bits that get stuck to the edges where you don't want, and then you accidentally activate those. So all I did was I took some black paint and just went around the edges of the moon. Anywhere where I didn't want the embossing powder to show, I just basically painted over it, just to neaten up the design and make it look a bit more like the triple moon symbol that I intended. And then just use my heat gun just to dry the paint off a bit, and there was a little bit of that one moon that hadn't activated, so I was just going over it, activating the embossing powder. Now you do have to be careful, because if you hold the heat gun in one place for too long, you actually melt the hot glue that's holding the cardboard strips down, because obviously it reacts to heat. So you have to time it just right between activating the embossing powder, but you have to take the heat off just before it starts to make the glue from the glue gun bubble up underneath. Then I took a teeny weeny container. This is just the top of a sharpener. It was the smallest container I could find, and marked the halfway point and then mixed some resin. This is a 1-to-1 ratio resin where you mix part A and part B together, and you just do equal parts of each. You can do it by weight or measure. It seems to work fine when I do it via measures, so I've just stuck to doing it that way. I haven't got any scales anyway. The only thing is you have to mix it for 5 minutes. So I mixed it for 5 minutes. I just sat there with my timer on. You could do it while watching a video, and then once it was all mixed together, it was a case of applying it little by little to the crescent moons first of all. This is to avoid spillage and make sure it doesn't go over the area where I want to apply it. And then I just poured it in to where the full moon piece is. And then it's just a case of leaving it overnight to set. And that's it. That's a triple moon cover for a book of shadows. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. Blessed be, and bye for now.